Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable, but not to eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilkas and plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason stay strapped with logic and facts. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road, the reason.
Hi, this is Road to Reason, the Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century, and I'm your host, Kayla Terzak, and this is my co-host, Bridget Lennon.
Hello, nice to see you.
All right, so you can always watch us on Ustream, or if you're local, channel 36 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can always catch us on one of our shows on YouTube, Road to Reason TV. As well as that, please visit our Facebook page, Road to Reason, and you'll be able to hear all the updates for the shows. So today we have a special guest. We're going to be interviewing Tracie Harris of the Atheist Experience, which is great. Mutual respect and mutual building up of public access shows. Before we do that, we have a couple announcements to make and some news items. So would you like to announce the Hotline Project?
Sure. If you're having questions about religion and want to talk to someone about your doubts, you can call the Hotline Project at 844-368-2848. They are a compassion-driven, non-judgmental volunteer organization, and you can call the hotline to get support for your doubts.
All right. So we have a joke of the week. So what do priests and Christmas trees have in common?
I don't know. What is it?
So apparently their balls are just for decoration.
Ah.
Okay, so we have a couple news items. Apparently the city of Madison, Wisconsin announced that they actually have a law now against the discrimination against atheists, which is really great because it's the first of its kind in the United States. So would you like to read a little bit off the law there? And I think you have a quote for that.
Okay, so I have some information about the Religious Freedom of Restoration Act, but as far as Madison, Wisconsin, they have added non-religious people as a protected class along with other minority groups such as the LGBT community. I also have some information about Indiana's Memories Pizza, which was the business that got $800,000 in donations for rejecting catering a gay wedding. Incidentally, George Takei also came up with a counter fundraiser where he's trying to see if he can raise at least half that amount for a pizzeria that does equally serve gay and heterosexual weddings.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why we chose those two news items is because they kind of go hand in hand. One is a law that gives religious people the right almost to discriminate against people based off of pretty much anything. If they can say, hey, this is against my religion, then they have the ability to actually discriminate against people. But then on the other hand, in Wisconsin, where we have some laws being passed that actually protects non-religious people as another protected group and community. So what do you think, how do you think that laws such as not being able to discriminate against somebody based off of atheism or non-belief in a religion, how do you think that ties into just freedom in general? Why do you think it's important to have those laws on the book?
Well, I think it's important because having freedom to practice whatever religious belief you want does not give you the right to impinge on others. Your religious freedom basically ends where someone else's civil rights begin. And I think it's important to have laws that make that clear, that you're free to practice as you wish until it interferes with someone else's life.
Yeah, and I think specifically, it's it's hard because I think that a lot of people, when they think of atheists, they think of them as not anti-specific, well, anti, but also, why protect a group of people who are, non-stamp collectors? I think that in a religious society and a very religious country, I think that a lot of people have a hard time understanding why there would be a need for protecting atheists. But I know that I have a hard time feeling comfortable with talking about my non-belief in a lot of situations. And I know that other people, we're going to be doing a show soon on atheism in the workplace. I know people in my workplace who have religious symbols up everywhere. I know people in the workplace who talk about religion with each other. And so every once in a while they'll say something trying to include me in the conversation, and I have a hard time saying, I don't believe in that, because I would be worried about that discriminating against I would be worried about discrimination. So I think putting laws in the book that protect against people being discriminated against for their non-beliefs or for that position, I think is important for the practice of freedom of religion, being able to say, hey, like, I don't believe in this. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, it sounds strange that we need to have a protected class for non-believers, but the fact is that a lot of non-believers are, being harassed or, getting fired. And, of course, this all depends on where you live and what the workplace is like, but, there are a lot of places that discriminate and don't think there's anything wrong with it, because for them, being religious is the norm and anything not religious is not.
Yeah. So what do you think, I know I've heard the argument before, there was a while ago someone who decided to submit a request for a bakery to write the words, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is off the top of my head, but write the words that they don't support gay weddings, or they don't support something along those lines. I'm pretty sure the words were a lot harsher. Why do you think that's different than, let's say, somebody, because the bakery was able to say, no, we're not going to write this. Why do you think that's different than a bakery refusing service for somebody based off of their sexuality and the kind of cake, a gay cake, a gay wedding cake?
Well, the difference is with the, person who wanted the anti-gay message on their cake, the bakery was well within their rights to refuse it, because they did not want to come across as supporting something that was pro-hatred, because that would be bad for their business, and that would be, them taking a stand on something that could possibly hurt their business.
Yeah, I kind of see it more along, and I've thought about this a lot, because me and my mom actually had a conversation on that. She's pretty conservative, and she is, a Christian. So we had a discussion about this, and one of the conclusions that I had on it is whether or not you should require somebody to write something that is hate speech, as opposed to somebody refusing service, a public service for someone that, you have a public service, and refusing someone's service based off of something, they're not writing hate speech on there. You can't require somebody to write, to actually, hold a position that they don't hold. But I think it's a little bit ambiguous. It can be ambiguous if you don't actually, talk about the nuances of that. And so do you understand, like, the...
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying.
So one is actually someone's requiring them to write hate speech, and that could actually hurt their business, and the other one is more of providing a service. So in my mind, I don't know if that actually, holds in, a court of law, but, so. Yeah. All right, so, so what do you think about the whole pizzeria?
Well, I think that, as far as the pizzeria getting, a lot of money, because apparently they felt like they were being discriminated against because they weren't allowed to discriminate. That was the thing about it. And, it's kind of sad to see, someone getting a lot of support for having hatred in their beliefs, but, that money could be going towards something more useful, like, studying research for cancer, or, paying for a child to get surgery, something like that. And the money's just going to something that is promoting hatred. That's just really sad.
So they're being funded for discriminating against people. So people actually came in support of their, this is in Indiana, where the bill was passed, where the Freedom for Religion bill, freedom of religion, something along those lines. And so the pizzeria is supposedly the first one to actually take a stand on that and say, hey, like, we're going to not serve and cater to this gay wedding. And so people came to support them on that. And so it's a shame. Anyway, it looks like we're going to go to some PSAs, and then we're going to bring on our host, Tracie Harris, for us to interview. We're really glad to have the Atheist Experience as kind of a partner in crime. So, all right.
In past installments, The Infidel has reported on pushback to advertising campaigns by Pamela Geller and her organization, the American Freedom Defense Initiative, which stretches the limit of the First Amendment. In February, we reported on some unknown person or group who had been applying large cutouts of Marvel's Islamic superhero Kamala Khan to cover Geller's ads. Last October, we told you about a different placard campaign in which Geller wanted to display images of the beheaded journalist James Foley, despite criticism of the campaign by Foley's parents. However, despite resistance by port authorities in cities from Philadelphia, Boston, D.C., and San Francisco, Chicago, and Miami, the courts are siding with Geller and insisting that the city buses display the offensive anti-Islamic pseudo-hate speech. In response, Ibrahim Hooper of the Council on American Islamic Relations said, "People of goodwill just need to get together and marginalize her type of anti-Muslim hatred." Geller cheered the court's decision in a statement saying, "Jew haters have been running anti-Semitic and anti-Israel ads on buses for years. We are responding." She offered no specific examples in defense of her assertion.
Good. Homemade noodles. Oh. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes in your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think then? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
Hi, may I please have an application? Thank you.
Skip the drama. Get your diploma.
Okay.
Take that first step towards a better future. Find free adult education classes at finishyourdiploma.org.
Hi, we're back, and now we're going to be interviewing Tracie Harris. She is a graphic designer in Austin, Texas. Raised in Orlando, Florida, she received her bachelor's degree in liberal studies from the University of Central Florida. So We have some questions for her today. So hi, Tracie.
Hello.
Hi. So thank you for coming on our show. We really appreciate it.
Well, good. Thanks for asking me. I'm glad to be on.
Absolutely. So we have some questions for you today. One of the first questions you've probably gotten before if you've ever been interviewed. So how did you get involved with the Atheist Experience?
Okay. Yeah, I moved to Austin, and I sometimes would watch public access because it could be kind of entertaining, some of the programs that people, I guess, purchased time for. And every now and then the Atheist Experience would come on. And when I figured out that I was an atheist, I called the show more often. And I don't even know if I called it before then. I think I only got interested in it, maybe only found the show after I identified as atheist. And so I called in a few times, and then I remember calling in at one point, and I think it was Don Baker invited me to come on down and meet them at the after show dinner. And he was just like, why don't you come out and, you know, just meet some people. So I went down there and I met some people, and I brought some of the little Atheist Eve cartoons that I did for a few years. And I presented those as prototypes. At the time, I had only done about 3 of them. And people enjoyed them, and the group, the Atheist Community of Austin, asked if they could host them on their website, which I said yes, they could do that, and I agreed to produce one every month. And like I said, I did that for a few years, and then I don't do Atheist Eve anymore. But also during this time, after I had shown up at a few events, they started to ask me to join the association, which I wasn't really a big joiner. And so I was just kind of like, oh, that's all right, you know. But as I showed up to more of their events, the more I felt like I should just go ahead and kick down and pay the dues. It wasn't that much, and it wasn't a big deal. So I went ahead and I joined the association. And at this point, I can't prove it, and I don't want to sound like conspiratorial, but I think this may have been laying the groundwork to start asking me to do the show, because it was right after I joined that they started to ask me, like, well, you know, now that you're a member, you know, you would qualify to be involved in some of these outreach things like the show. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not really interested in doing that, because I don't know that I want to really talk to people live on the air, on television, and be answering phone calls from, you know, Christians. And so they asked me a few times to do this, and I turned them down. And then finally, Don Baker invited me on, where they had a young woman who actually had a topic, and she was going to be an invited guest. And so she came on, and he said, why don't you just come on and just sit in, and you won't be so you know, pressured to be involved, because we'll have a guest and we'll have a host, and so you can just chime in if you feel comfortable. And so it was kind of like this weird episode where we had 3 people on there, and that was the first time I was on. And then after that program was finished, I was notified that I was now on the rotation, and so I should pay attention to the schedule. And that's I guess I didn't balk at that. I just thought I found it funny, and just thought that it was kind of humorous that I wasn't actually asked if I wanted to be regularly on the show. I just got put on the schedule and told. So that's how I ended up on the program.
So they're kind of like us. We want to have Tracie Harris on our show. So you don't like being the center of attention?
I guess I just felt like I didn't have confidence that I would be able to answer people on the fly. I mean, it's a live dialogue, and I had no idea what people would be saying or people would be presenting, what types of you know, faith backgrounds callers would have, what, even within the Christian religion itself, there's so many different denominations, and I just felt like I wasn't informed enough, or maybe just, I guess informed is the best word, informed enough to get up there and not make a fool of myself. So I just I guess was afraid that I would get on television and just seem like an absolute, you know, ridiculous wreck on the air. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world, because at the time we weren't streaming, so it was just public access. And so it was a small audience in Austin of whoever happened to be watching Access on Sunday afternoons. So it wasn't really that many people, but as soon as it started to go out on Ustream, that's when it picked up a lot. And at that point, though, I had been on for a little while, and I felt a little more comfortable. I think if I would have thought it through, I might have used a different name for the show. But at the point that it started streaming, all the archives were already in place, and so there was nothing to be done about it. And I was just kind of like, well, genie's out of the bottle now. There's no pushing that back in. What's done is done, and so there you go.
Wow. So I hope you don't mind us giving you some compliments. So one of the things that I appreciate about you personally is, being a public face. A good public face means that, if people like you, it means that they actually feel personal connection towards you. Not a lot of people can do that well, and especially not a lot of people who are doing it as well as presenting a compassionate face while also talking to people about how their beliefs are wrong. So that's something that I really appreciate about you, and one reason I personally wanted to have you on the show. So you came from an international of church, not international, the Church of Christ background. I actually came from the International Church of Christ. I don't know if you know anything about that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your transition from the Church of Christ, what your experiences were there, and then the transition to atheism. What were you thinking?
Yeah. And thank you for separating those two events, because they were completely different events. I left the church probably 10 years before I became an atheist. And when I left the church, it was for, I was having a lot of problems doctrinally with what they were teaching. And I was finding a lot of information that conflicted with what they were teaching. And when I would present it to the preacher or to some of the men of the congregation, it's a very, very male-dominant congregation or type of denomination. And when I would come to them and say, look, this seems like an error and we shouldn't be preaching error, so we should probably not be saying this from the pulpit because this isn't correct, there wasn't a whole lot of response toward change. What I got was sort of just this is the doctrine and this is what we teach. And I thought to myself, yeah, but isn't the idea that if we're preaching something that's an error, we're supposed to fix it? Like, isn't that what we're always talking about, is how wrong it is to preach error? And I'm telling you that I looked this up and it's not correct, and you're telling me that you're still going to preach this? And I didn't quite know what to say. And then I found out there was like this other weird side story, I won't get into it too deeply, of another preacher that was in a neighboring community who had some views that I agreed with that were also contrary to the doctrines. But it's really hard to get into it without somebody having that background. But they have these ideas that there are certain parts of the doctrine that are key to salvation, and certain parts of the doctrine that are considered to be not key to salvation, upon which you can disagree and still remain, members of the church who get along on all the things that actually matter. And so this particular doctrine, ironically, was not a matter of salvation, but it impacted other beliefs that would be. So it was this weird domino effect where the belief itself in this particular thing was not really something that somebody's salvation would make or break. But at the same time, believing it led to other views that caused problems with other issues that would end up affecting matters of salvation. But what I saw was the church, the preacher who was coming to this conclusion and was teaching it in his own congregation, which was receptive to it until he got in the pulpit. Then they became non-receptive to it and kicked him out after they had encouraged him to bring it forward, telling him they thought it was the truth. When it became unpopular with the neighboring congregation, suddenly he got to be the fall guy and was, expunged from that church, lost his job and everything. And when I saw what they were doing at my church, they were basically inoculating people against this idea without actually telling them what was being preached at this neighboring church. So they weren't presenting the idea and disputing it. They were simply trying to teach around it and kind of teach other ideas more robustly so that people would tend to reject it or think that it was wrong. And it was offensive to me because the preacher that was kicked out had offered to debate this publicly and was rejected. So there was no public dialogue. There was no information to the congregations about what was actually going on. There was, it was just this sort of few people making these decisions that affected all of these other people without them actually ever knowing that it was being affected. And I just felt that it was so dirty and underhanded and just a dishonest perspective that they had always, from what I understood, preached against. The whole idea was supposed to be that it's about truth. And so when they're sitting there doing this and I'm watching all of this, it was very disturbing. But then I started to talk to some people at my university. I got off into more a study about the origins of the Bible books, and that was when everything just broke and fell apart, was when I realized how the Bible was constructed, how it was put together, how it was historically collected and compiled. And that was when I was just like, wow, this is nothing like what I thought. This is not the model that I built in my head. And that was another thing that was interesting to me. And I encourage people, if there's anybody watching that is a person of faith, if you are a Christian and they have taught you Bible literalism, or that the Bible is the inspired word of God, you might want to consider how many courses they've ever taught you at your church about how that Bible was ever historically created. Because when I started to learn about that, I realized that in all the years that I'd gone to the church, there had never been a class about the historic origins of the Bible. I had been taught that, these people wrote these books and these books were collected, and now we have the Bible. And it's like, yeah, but there's a whole lot more to that story that makes it clear that this was a long, drawn-out, man-made, man-motivated endeavor that was the product of the faith, not the foundation of it. And so at that point, I started meeting with the preacher regularly because I was just like, I'm out of here. And he said, well, come and meet with me. Have these classes, these private classes, we'll talk. So I had private classes with him, and at the end of the day, he could not demonstrate that this book was inspired by God. And I was like, well, if you can't demonstrate it and you get up there and preach it, that's hypocrisy. That's dishonesty. I don't know what to say. If you can't show that this book is inspired by God, that each one of the books that are included in there, and he actually asked me that, he's like, well, what do you want me to demonstrate, that every book in here is inspired? And I said, isn't that what you preach? Right? I mean, that's what you're saying. So yes, I expect you to be able to demonstrate what you preach is true.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I just have to have faith that God had a hand in the creation of this book. And I was like, well, that's not truth. You're believing what the doctrine is of this church without actually being able to found it on anything real, and simply saying, I'm just going to hope that I'm right. And you're telling me that you get up there and preach the truth every Sunday, and that you wouldn't preach an error, and you're telling me now that you can't back this up and you're still going to get up there and preach it, then I can't be part of this. So I left. But I still believed in God, and I believed that my mission to find God and my mission to do what God wanted was more than sitting in a church and promoting something that I couldn't believe in, that I couldn't support. And it took me about 10 years to finally come to a realization that there was nothing there. I looked at loads of different religious views. I got online and I argued in different forums. I presented ideas in those forums that were, heavily criticized, painfully criticized sometimes, rudely criticized many times. But I learned, right? Like, I learned from all those conversations, and I learned from all of those people. And sometimes I learned very slowly and not very willingly, but I did come around. And ultimately, when I realized that I couldn't define what I meant by God, and I couldn't point to anything real, I just had to say that what I'm wishing for really isn't there.
Yeah. I definitely identify with a lot of that. I was a part of a movement, the International Church of Christ, which had a lot of the same beliefs, except it was heavily focused on evangelism, a lot more heavily focused on, outward focus. A lot of history there. I don't know if you know any of it, but yeah. So did you have a question for Tracie?
Yeah, I was wondering, how has being on the Atheist Experience impacted your personal life?
I think it takes up a lot of my Sundays. or a few, not a lot. I shouldn't say a lot. The crew, it takes a lot of the crew's Sundays. It takes a few of my Sundays. It doesn't really impact me that much, and I think that that's kind of a thing that people outside the show sometimes don't realize. They see the show and they associate me with the show, and I associate myself with the rest of my life. So they have this very, very heavily leaning perspective of me as a Atheist Experience host, whereas I see myself as this person who every now and then volunteers on a Sunday to sit and answer phones for a local nonprofit. And it's kind of strange to me how some people interpret that role. It'll be so important to them for whatever reason, and I'm thinking that I don't want to say it's not, I support the work, and I'm glad to be doing what I do, and I am, happy to help the community. But I don't feel that my contribution is as large or as important as I think what I see a lot of other people doing, and the hours that I see a lot of other people putting in, the real hard work that some people, like I say, the crew is down there every single Sunday, working. They get there early, they leave there late. They work every single show, and they, they get like a name on the end of the show. They don't get any kind of real recognition, no face recognition, nothing like that. And yet the one person who gets up there once every month and a half and just talks on the phone for an hour, I'm the one that gets all the recognition. And it's so bizarre to me that, that small amount of my own resource can be so... I'm glad it's appreciated by some people. I think some people will appreciate it a little too much. Or I don't want to say appreciate it too much, but maybe think of it in a more grand light than it probably deserves, I think.
Our crew is smiling and nodding their heads in the back.
They know.
Well, that's really cool. One of the things I really appreciate is your humble attitude. I think it comes across. And it's hard to think of somebody who's a part of such a popular atheist show as somebody who's anything other than what they see on TV. So, I've always been interested in your personal life, and we're not going to go too much into it if you don't want to, but yeah, so that's really cool. We're really glad to have you, glad to have a little bit more insight as to how you became an atheist. So, do you have a question for her?
I know you have a podcast called Godless Bitches, but I haven't heard any new podcasts recently, so I was just wondering, how that's going.
I will say that it has not been officially ended. All right, so right now the podcast remains tabled. I would very much be up for doing more shows. It's just a matter of resource, I think, at this point. It's one thing for me to say I'm willing to sit there and talk for an hour or two, once a week or twice a week. Once a week or once every couple weeks. It's something else, though, to get somebody to actually put in the energy to be able to produce the podcast. That's kind of, I think, what's the hang up currently. So we, I know Beth has been involved in other things, and she is, it's kind of, that was her baby, that was her vision. Beth created the program. I think it was at first I was really skeptical that such a program would even be, welcomed or required in the community, and I admitted right away that I was wrong. The feedback to the show was immense, and people loved it. And so I just thought, wow, she really saw something that was needed, and she jumped on it, and really provided something that people wanted. But in the meantime, she got very busy with a lot of other things, and so Beth is kind of at a point where she's just like, I don't have time for this, which is completely fair and completely understandable when I consider everything that's on her plate. But I look at it and it's like, I'm not equipped to produce the podcast, like from my house, I guess. We have some options, like we could start looking into the potential of outputting it kind of more like they do the nonprofits down at the ACA building where they have like a studio. So we could take advantage of a few things, but it means an inconvenience for some people, just sort of logistically. I know Jen lives very, very far from the building, and so it's a little bit more of a pain for her to get down there if we were going to produce from that location.
That's why it was once a month, so.
Yeah, it's painful because it was a good show. It has the potential to continue to be a good show. I had a really phenomenal guest lined up for the next show that never came. Aww. And I would really be up for continuing it. I mean, I enjoyed doing it, and I more than I thought I would. It was surprisingly fun.
What about the podcast that you think did not have a place and you thought that wouldn't be receptive, wouldn't be taken well?
Different people have different experiences in this community. Mm-hmm. And so my experience in the community has been one of sort of obliviousness to gender disparities. I go to events and I'll be hanging out, having a really good time, and somebody at some point might say to me, like, does it seem weird to you that you're the only woman here? And I'll be like, oh, I'm the only woman here? Like, I didn't notice. But, and so I don't really see things like that. It's like, until somebody calls it out. And I obviously, there's always going to be a person or two that may be making an event or something uncomfortable, somebody who is, maybe not concerned with other people's comfort, who proceeds down particular paths with people that attend events and maybe are making other people uncomfortable, however you want to describe it. I tend to just kind of look at them as either funny or look at them as maybe like annoying, like I don't like sitting near that person or just whatever. But, there are other people who have different histories than I do, who have different, backgrounds and proclivities. And for some of those people, the things that I might find, goofy and funny or sad or annoying, they find frightening, or they find so uncomfortable that they can't be around, or maybe they become like a particular target of a person like this and don't feel comfortable coming to events. And so it turned out that, there were a lot of, and the other thing is my, I'm not going to get too much into it, but in my day job, it's like a very big company. It's very female oriented. So I don't have a lot of issues with like any sort of sexism or problems like that at my company. We're way too big to have any sort of problems that a lot of smaller personal companies have. We're way too female weighted to have any kind of issues with sex. It's like a very, very politically correct company with a lot of rules and a lot of regulations around how we react and interact with other workers. It's very professional, and everybody there, I think, has a really good employment experience. And so in my mind, I am kind of coming from a place of privilege, I think, as a woman, in that I'm surrounded on all fronts by a lot of equality, where there are some women in situations where they don't have that. And so for them, the idea of the requirement of feminism on the local level is much more personal and much more important. And I don't think I realized how much that was, until I started to hear some of the stories about things that occurred. I heard a story, one young woman that I've met in person had an event where she attended, and I think it was like she'd only attended 1 or 2 events at her local meetup group, and someone actually touched her ass. I mean, during the event.
Wow.
And she complained about it. She did the right thing, and she went to the president of the association. She said where she was, what happened, who did this, and they blew it off. Like, took no action, basically told her not to worry about it. It's not a big deal. The guy's, whatever. And she was just like, wow, that's not the reaction that I expected at all. And in my view, that wouldn't be, I've never experienced, first of all, anything like that, where somebody thought that would be appropriate to touch me in that way without my permission. But I also, I don't think I've ever seen that at an event. I mean, it was so out of line. And the thought of something like that occurring is bad enough, but the follow-up of taking that complaint to the leadership and then having it sort of dismissed as not a big deal. They believe you, but they think it's not a big deal. It wasn't that they didn't believe her. They were like, yeah, we know who you're talking about, and yeah, okay, but try not to take it too seriously. It's like, wait a minute, this is not normal on any level. And this is not okay for somebody who's only been at one or two of your events to welcome them in this way. You don't know who this person is, what makes them comfortable, what may or may not have been in their history, and you don't do this. You just don't do this unless it's like a really good friend that this is acceptable. So stuff like that. I mean, and there were so many stories like that I just didn't expect. And when I started to hear about it, I was like, okay, I'm seeing the issue here.
Yeah, and I really do appreciate your voice in that. I never really experienced that either. Anything along those lines, but I think it just depends on what community you're a part of. I mean, every place.
Absolutely, yes.
It really just depends on where you're at and what community you're a part of, and we get to kind of shape who we are and what we want to be in each individual community. And that's the cool thing about the atheist movement, I guess you could call it, is that it's so wide and varied that you can get one thing one place and not the other. But I guess there is kind of a culture there. So we are on public access right now, and you have a public access station that you work with. So what do you think about atheist activism using that kind of sphere? What's your take on that? Like, how do you see it actually helping the atheist community?
I think public access is an interesting thing. I mean, it's sort of whatever you make it. So there are so many different types of shows on public access that range from super goofy to very serious and absolutely nuts. Like conspiracy wacko, and there are other programs that are informational. Like we had one that featured a guy who was a nutritionist, just kind of giving nutritional information for 30 minutes a night. And there was like another guy who did massages, and he would show the massage technique and actually do a massage on the show and kind of show different techniques that he did. And so there were some informational programs. There were other programs that were conspiracy theorists. There were other programs where people were dressed all strange and doing really crazy things and taking really bizarre phone calls. And then you have the public outreach. And it's interesting that on our own public access in Austin, we have a lot of church groups. I think we have like a couple channels on Access that are dedicated to religious programming specifically. And then we're on like the regular channel, and every now and then we get preempted by religious programming. But I think that it's a form of public access to the public that associations can make use of. It's generally not that expensive, and if you're willing to do it, or if you have people that are dedicated enough, they can go down and get the appropriate licensing, or whatever they call it, to be able to produce or be in the studio, work the cameras, work the equipment. And if you have a little group of people, it really doesn't take that much. I mean, there were people that were producing their own programming on Access, and I'm pretty sure it was just them. And so if you have several people at your disposal who think, hey, this would be a good idea, I would say if you've got public access available in your area, look into it. And the live streaming as well is, I think, even a better option. Like I say, for the atheist community of Austin was using public access for many, many years before they went to live stream, but nothing shot that show like a rocket besides the internet stream.
That Matt Dillahunty,
Yeah, but even that was doing it when it was public access. I mean, really, when we started streaming, that's when people were like, what is this? And that's when the viewership went way up. Before we were streaming, you could pretty much call in and get your call on the air. After we started streaming, that's when people were like, I can't get through on the phone. No, you can't. Our phone lines are loaded before we even start the show.
Especially when Tracie's on. That Tracie Harris. But we never, we're streaming too. Like we have a Ustream account. And we're also on YouTube, but we don't get as much attention as the Atheist Experience. Not that we're, complaining about that. I mean, you guys have an awesome show with a lot of seasoned hosts there. So yeah, one of the things that we wanted to do, just to change the topic a little bit, one of my favorite videos that you do is the dice. Yeah, I really like that a lot. I think it does well in explaining probabilities, and just because we don't know, if something is, just because we don't know what something is or the details about it doesn't necessarily mean that it's possible,
Right, it means we don't know if it's possible or not. Correct.
Yeah. So I actually brought some dice, and I thought maybe we could do the analogy here on the show. Do you know it by heart? Would you like to do the honors, or do you want to?
There's a lot of different analogies that we did with the dice, and I think the initial program had to do with the 3 jars, right? So you had the jar that represented a jar of nothing, or a jar that did not contain dice, I should probably say, to be more clear, because there's no such thing as nothing. So there's...
Could say some air or something in there, but yeah.
Yeah, but even if it's an empty space is something. So actually defining nothing gets very weird very quickly. So
yeah.
You've got a jar that has no dice. You have another jar that has the transcendental dice, and then you had the jar that had the regular standard dice. And the question that that was originally raised, or the reason that I built the model, was to try and investigate how do we tell which of the jars contains no dice and which of the jars contains those transcendental supernatural dice. How do we tell those 2 jars apart? And ultimately you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately you've got the jar of dice that you can measure and see, and there it is. And then you have the other 2 jars, and you can't tell which of them has supernatural dice in it and which of them has no dice in it.
Yeah.
And
actually,
I mean,
sorry.
That's all right. No, I mean that was pretty much the gimmick. But I had Matt on with me during the first showing, and he, he does magic, and so he had a lot of other things that he wanted to play with about the dice, and I think the thing that you were referring to about the possibility had to do with like an actual another show where we had the dice on again, and we were talking about the idea of what is possible, and how do we know what is possible, and there were a lot of people that were still very confused on that point, and we came up with another description that helped us somewhat, but there's still some people who don't quite get the idea that not knowing what the parameters are for something means that you don't know that it's possible. You have to know what's required to at least have the basic ingredients to cause a particular event.
Yeah.
If you don't know what can cause it, then you can't really speak to the possibilities of it because you don't know. And so there was 2 questions that we came up with that had to do with something, I think it was along the lines of, is it possible to get to Las Vegas with the amount of gas we have in the car versus I'm trying to think of how it worked. It's possible to get to Las Vegas with the amount of gas we have in the car, or oh shoot, I didn't know this was going to come up, so I'm kind of unprepared. But there was another way of phrasing that had to do with, oh wow, I'm drawing a blank.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Is it similar to this analogy? Because I actually wanted to perform the actual.
Do it. Yeah.
Because I think that it really rung true with me. Because I always, when people ask me, do you believe if there's a God? Do you believe in a God? And I would say, well, I don't know if I don't believe it necessarily, but it's possible. And I would say that without really thinking. And I think one of the things that happened is this dice analogy really made me realize that I don't have enough information to assess whether or not it is possible that there is a God.
Saying that something is possible is making a positive claim.
Yeah.
So you have to demonstrate how you know that.
Yeah.
How do you know that it's possible? And like with the dice, we understand once we can see them. If you have a single-sided die that is not rigged, you know that it is possible to roll a 6 with it. You may or may not roll a 6 on this particular roll, but there is nothing that's like impeding you from being able to come up with an outcome of 6. It certainly is within the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
But when you have no known number of dice and someone asks you, is it possible to roll a 21? I don't know, because I don't know how many dice we have. So, and the people that were, I think, writing in and saying that if you don't know, then it's possible. It's like, well, then I would hate to rely on you for a feasibility study, because you have to be able to say, when someone asks you to demonstrate if something's possible, what you have to do is go out and figure out what it takes to do this and whether or not it can be done. Now, that doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to do it. It just means that you at least understand what would be required to make it happen, and that if we can meet these particular criteria, then this outcome can be had. And you do have to have some information. When you have no information on something, you really can't give, something like a God. I don't know what I would even be looking for in order to determine whether or not such a thing is possible. I don't know what we're even talking about.
Yeah. And just to be clear, because we didn't even explain what it was, for our viewers who haven't actually seen the video, basically what Matt and Tracie did on the one video that I had seen is take a normal normal die, and a container with some dye in it. And we know there's a couple because we can hear it smushing around, but we don't really know how much is in there. On this die, we know that we can't, if we only have one roll, in order to get a 7, we know we can't roll a 7 because there's only 6 sides and there's only 1 to 6. And so even if we have an infinite amount of rolls, it would be impossible to actually roll a 7 if you can't add based off of the previous roll. Now, we don't know whether or not we can roll a 58 out of these dice, because we don't know how many dice are in here, or 47, or 32. If somebody said you can roll a 47, they may be in fact wrong if there are only 2 die in here. Even it's not possible just because we don't know how many are in here. Because if you say that it's possible, you're in fact wrong, because it was never possible. Just because you didn't know it didn't mean to make it possible. So that's the analogy, just for our viewers who may not know what we're talking about. So you were prompted to come up with this analogy by your previous dice experience. And so has there been anybody who's come up with a good, poked holes in that analogy that you felt like was a good,
it's not a hole poking, but there are some people who get confused, and I do remember with the gas tank, there's a difference between asking whether or not it's possible that the car has enough gas to get to Vegas versus it's possible to get to Vegas with the amount of gas that we have in the car. Those are 2 different claims. Some people can't understand the difference, and those are the people that had the problem. Those are the people that wrote in and said, no, it's possible because there could be this many dice. And it's like, it's possible if there are that many dice, but we don't know how many dice there are. So it's like saying that, it's possible to get to Vegas if that tank is full. Well, that doesn't mean that we still don't know if it's possible to get to Vegas or not. We have to go see if the tank is full. Now we know if it's possible to get to Vegas. So we'd have to figure out if that tank is full. But if I tell you there's enough gas in that car that it's possible to drive from here to Vegas, then we can determine how much gas at a minimum is in that car based on that claim, because there has to be at least that much gas in there. One claim tells you at the minimum how much gas must be right now in the car. The other claim, that tank could be empty. Those are 2 different statements. Saying that the car can hold enough gas to get to Vegas doesn't mean that it has enough gas in it to get to Vegas. But if I say it's possible to get to Vegas with the gas that's in the tank, then I'm claiming that we have enough gas in that tank to get us from here to Vegas.
So to bring it back to the dice analogy, what you're saying is there's a difference between saying it's possible that there's enough dice in here to roll a 47, but we don't know if it's possible to in fact roll a 47 because we don't know whether there's enough dice in here to roll a 47.
Absolutely.
So they're 2 different claims that we're talking about.
They are. And if you're telling me that it's possible to roll a sub 47 with what's in that box, then you have told me that there must be at least sufficient number of dice in there to roll that 47. And if there's not, then you are wrong. It's an inaccurate statement to say you can roll a 47. It's possible to roll a 47 with what's in there. if you don't know how many dice are in there. Then you're actually just simply assuming something that you do not know is correct. And that's what people do when they're saying that it's possible that gods exist. My question is, what are the criteria? What is in fact the baseline criteria required for a god to exist that you are looking at to determine that this thing is possible?
That's cool. Well, we're coming up to the end of our show, and I guess speed round questions, short answers, and at the end of our show, if you wanted to plug the Atheist Experience and tell us all about your show and when to tune in, that would be great. So do you have any last minute quick questions for her about, you were going to ask about the Atheist Eve or something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are you going to be doing any more Atheist Eve comics, or, is that just something you're not doing anymore?
No, I think Eve is retired at this point.
Aww. Okay.
Yeah.
Was it kind of something that you did to, get it all out there?
Yeah, it actually was. I think I said what I needed to say, and I was done with it. She reached the end of her usefulness.
That's really cool. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel that I'm not going to plug here because it has a little bit of personal, not too personal because it's on the internet, but not something I wanted to be associated directly with me at the moment. But I know I'll probably stop doing that once I get it out of my system because I just deconverted. So, do you have any other questions? Anything that?
Are you going to be going to any conventions or giving any talks?
Yeah, in fact, I am heading to California with a San Jose atheist group that's going to host me out there for about a week, and I think that's going to be between May 12th to the 15th. We haven't confirmed travel yet, so it's not, I'm going to say it's not a solid, but I've booked those dates at work. So, and the other thing is ReasonCon, which is coming up at the end of the month. So I'll be at ReasonCon if anybody's out toward North Carolina.
So 2 words that you would tell yourself, back when you were in your Church of Christ about who you're going to be today. 2 words.
Oh,
top of your head.
2 words about who I'm going to be today. Completely unexpected.
Okay, that's great. That's great. All right, so we're really glad to have you on the show. Real quick, we have about 30 seconds to plug your show. Not that that needs much plug because, you guys are awesome.
Well, thank you for having me on. And just real quickly, we do air Sunday afternoons. So we're actually coming up in a couple, like another hour or 2. So if people want to see us, they can tune in. I think it's 4:30 to 5:30 Central Time here in Austin. And we do Ustream. We do have a website, so you can just Google the Atheist Experience. I think it's Atheist Experience or atheist-experience.com. But you can look it up. Just Google Atheist Experience and you'll get the site. And the Ustream link is on the page.
Yeah. And so we also have a Ustream link, a Ustream if you just look us up, Road to Reason. So, well, thank you.
Thank you.